With fear, they both turned around and began to run hard and fast as they could. No such luck, they were still getting bit and stung from head to toe. They had dug up a huge hornet's nest, which looked to be billions of them. By the time they got back to the house, they had stings all over. The hornets had chased them all the way back to the house. So Kenny had the bright idea of going in the house and getting the fly swatters to kill them. Jimmy just looked at Kenny like he had lost his mind. Then Kenny said, "We were going to take gas and matches and burn the bees up." Jimmy still didn't think this was a good idea, as he thought to himself, well, if we get on fire, at least the bees won't sting us, as he let out a little chuckle under his breath. As they both made their way back to the hornet's nest with the gas, matches, and fly swatters, they both started laughing so hard they had to stop and catch their breath. When they finally made it back to the nest, Jimmy let Kenny pour the gas since he was the oldest. Kenny said, "Okay, are you ready? When I pour the gas, you get ready to throw a match and they're okay." They both had a fly swatter in their back pocket. Jimmy nodded to him with the matches on the ready. He pulled out 2 or 3 and let them then use those to light the whole pack. Kenny poured the gas and the hornets were stinging again. Then Jimmy threw the matches in and up jumped a huge ball of fire. The fire got so big in the flash of heat it burned Jimmy's hair a little and burned off Kenny's eyebrows. Even with the fire, the hornets were still stinging them, but they were fire bees now. As they both reached for their fly swatters and went to swatting them, they still couldn't hold the bees back. There was too many of them. They were stung all over. Jimmy even got stung in his mouth, and needless to say, they tore both of them up good. They had so many stings you couldn't hardly recognize them from all the swelling. Jimmy thought to himself and said, if someone saw us swatting fire bees with a fly swatter, they would tell us we were insane and put us in the crazy house with Kenny's mom. At least in the end, the fire killed all the hornets. It's really a wonder they both didn't die from so many stings. Sometime a few weeks later, Aunt Helen had come out the door as she yelled for Kenny, Michelle, and Jimmy. They were playing under the big oak tree by the house. As they all 3 came over to see what she wanted, Helen said, "Come on," as they followed her in the house. She handed them their best clothes and told them to get dressed. So they did as she asked, though she didn't really say where they were going. Michelle had put on her yellow dress, and Kenny was wearing his chocolate brown suit. Jimmy had put on his baby blue suit. They looked like 2 little businessmen. They all 3 looked so cute, and they only wore these outfits for special occasions. Afterwards, they all went to Helen's car and got in. As she pulled out of her driveway and got on Route 50 West, it seemed like they drove for hours, and it was hot that day. None of the kids knew where she was taking them, but wherever it was a long ways from the house. As they turned right off the highway and then took another right, they pulled into a big parking lot. There was a huge building, and it looked really spooky to the kids. Helen found an empty slot and parked there as they all got out of the car and went to the big doors in front. As they opened the big doors, then walked in the building, there was a lady at a front desk. Helen said, "Hi, can you tell me what room Margaret Hatter's in?" The lady spoke up and said, "You can't go to her room, but there is a waiting room down the hall where you can wait to see her while I page her." So they all went and had a seat while they waited for Margaret. The kids were looking at some of the people that were also in the waiting room. They all 3 got scared. They kept looking back and forth at each other. Jimmy leaned over in his chair and whispered something in Kenny's ear as his eyes were already big as flying saucers. Jimmy said, "Those people are weird." Kenny nodded back to Jimmy's to confirm what he had just told him. About that time, Margaret walked into the waiting room, as she found an empty chair, then took a pack of cigarettes out of her pocket. She opened them and pulled one out. She then used a lighter, which she had in her hand, to light it and took a seat. Margaret was acting really strange, and she didn't even say hi to her kids or her mother. Helen thought to herself, wow, they must have her on some strong drugs, because she looked like a zombie. Helen really wondered if she even recognized them at all. Helen spoke up and said, "Are you allowed to go outside?" And she said, "Yes." Helen said, "The kids felt really uncomfortable in there, that's why I said let's walk outside." So they all walked down the hall, then out the back door to where they had tables you could sit at. You could smell the salt in the air as they all sat down to where the kids could see the bay. So they went to walk around the bit down the hill to the water's edge, watching the waves roll in and crash on the shore. They even had a place roped off where you could swim, but they knew they didn't have their swimming trunks. They went back to the table and told Helen there was a place to swim. So Helen told them the next time they could bring their swimming trunks and go for a dip. 2 weeks later they came back to see Margaret again, and this time they brought their swimming trunks. As Kenny and Jimmy made their way to the water, they began to run and planned on jumping in. They realized the water was cold, but they didn't even care because it was very hot out that day. They were riding the waves back to shore as they went back and did it repeatedly. Michelle had come down to join them, but she didn't go as far in as them. All of a sudden she screamed frantically as she got out and ran back to the table crying. Kenny and Jimmy didn't hear her because of the roar of the waves. Helen asked her what was wrong, and she said something had bit her. The next thing you know, Jimmy and Kenny started running toward Helen screaming, "Jellyfish almost stung us, but we got away just in time." Meanwhile, Bill was sitting around at his brother's house as he thought about going to see his mom and dad in Delmar, Delaware. He hadn't talked to them since he left Maryland, so he decided to himself he'd go back. He began to get all of his clothes together and put them in the trunk of his car. He went back into the house to talk to his brother. He told him he was going to see their mom and dad. Charles said, "Okay, Bill, tell them I said hello. Also be careful and make sure you stop to get some rest along the way." He knew how long it would take to get to his parents' house. Bill replied, "I will." They both knew it was a 2.5-day drive. So, they both said their goodbyes and Bill went out the door. He got in his car and started the engine, then he pulled out, blowing the horn to his brother as went on his way to Delaware. A few days later, Bill pulled into his parents' driveway. He turned the engine off and got out of his car. Then he began working across the yard to the front door as he knocked to the old tune, "Shave and a haircut, 2 bits." His dad Alan opened the door and told him to come on in. He walked into the dining room and Bill sat at the table with him. His dad spoke up and said, "How you been, Bill?" He replied, "Me and Alice filed for a divorce." "Why are you getting a divorce?" asked his dad. Bill replied saying he was sick of her bullshit, lies, cheating, and the drugs too. "Can you believe she's hooked on heroin?" asked Bill. "Have you seen your son?" asked Alan. "No," said Bill. "He may not even be my son." About this time, Bill's mom Myrtle walked in the room and Alan started telling her what Bill had told him. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Myrtle said, "Well, Bill, if you need a place to stay, you know you are welcome to stay here." Bill told them he was going to go and see his son. He got up from the table and told them he'd be back later. He went out to his car, got in, started it up, and noticed his gas needle was almost on. He had an old friend at the Sunoco named Fritz he liked to talk to. He was a mechanic. He thought maybe he would help him out with a few dollars in gas. After that, Bill was supposed to have Jimmy in the summer, though he never did because he was always gone. He came a few times but only stayed for a couple minutes, then he would be off again to who knows where. He eventually got remarried and his new wife Janice disliked little Jimmy because he wasn't her kid. All of Helen's family was very mean to little Jimmy, even Bill's too, except Bill's mom and dad. They didn't like how all of them treated little Jimmy. They always beat the hell out of him all the time, and they were so mean to him. Helen's dad and mom lived right next door, but they were mean to him too. Jimmy was lucky if they let him have anything to eat lately, but he didn't understand why they treated him this way. Bill pulled his car into Helen's driveway, mashed the brakes and came to a sudden halt. He put his car in park and shut off the engine, then Bill gave the horn a fast toot as he opened his door to get out. He saw his son come out of the house. Helen was right behind him as she walked over and started cussing him and said, "You know damn well you're supposed to have Jimmy during the summer." Bill asked Helen, "Is it okay if I take him to Dad's for a while?" She spoke up and said, "Sure," as she thought this was her chance to get rid of him. She led Jimmy to the other side of his car and she opened the door. Then she told him to get in, so Jimmy did as he was told. Bill got back in and put his key in the ignition, then started his car. As he put it in reverse and backed out of the driveway, he looked both ways before he pulled out of the driveway and to the highway. Bill said, "I bet you didn't know I used to have a monkey," he told Jimmy. "Where's he?" asked Jimmy, and his dad replied, "The damn monkey went up a telephone pole and got himself shot to death." Jimmy said, "Oh, I wish you still had him," as he let a little chuckle. "Yeah," his dad said, "he was a big monkey too." as he continued to tell Jimmy all about his monkey Joe. He said Joe lived in the house with us. My mom would get mad at Joe for eating all her butter. Jimmy let out a laugh. He thought that was the funniest thing he had ever heard and said, "Butter? That must have been a crazy monkey." His dad said he even ate at the table with us and everything. He went on and said, one day the old cat they had got on the kitchen table and Joe was in there. Mom didn't like the cat on the table, so she picked up the cat and opened the screen door to put the cat outside. Well, Joe saw her do that. So, the next time that cat got on the table, Joe saw him and the crazy monkey grabbed the cat by the tail, then threw it right through the screen.